OmniServer wedges, included with OmniServer Professional Edition, are built-in components that provide additional powerful capabilities that expand the functionality of OmniServer beyond its core connectivity and data parsing abilities for non-standard device connectivity. One of these flexible components is the OmniServer Database Wedge, which allows you to log your device data to any ODBC-compliant database in a highly configurable format with configurable conditions. And it provides this ability right in OmniServer, eliminating the need for separate external components or applications. The Database Wedge gives you the ability to log your process data from your devices based on fully configurable conditions for further analysis over time. In this video, I will step you through how easy it is to configure a database wedge in OmniServer Professional, and you can see the results yourself. So first, I have my OmniServer configuration open here. We need to go to the Client section. So I'll highlight the Client section. That's available in my tree view here on the left. Now, you can see the database wedge at the top here in my list of clients, along with the other supported wedges and standard client interfaces such as OPC and SweetLine. Now, just a note, if you're not seeing any of the wedges available in your client section, that indicates you currently have a license installed other than OmniServer Professional. The wedges will be available only if you're using the free trial version or if you have a Professional Edition license installed. So I have my database wedge section here. I'm just going to go ahead and double click on database wedge to open the dialog window where we define new wedges for logging either to different databases or by different conditions, or you use this to modify and delete existing database wedges. So I'm going to go ahead and click the new button to add a new database wedge. The name is just a descriptive field to represent this wedge. So for this demo, I'm going to monitor the fill level on a holding tank over time. So I'm going to call my database wedge tank_level. I need that underscore because only letters, numbers, and underscores are permitted, so no spaces. And then we have an optional description, which can provide additional details about what this database wedge does. I'm just going to enter logs to SQL when tank level changes. And you'll see the initial mode is enabled. And you can set this to enabled or disabled. The initial mode's enabled. Now this indicates whether the file wedge or whether the database wedge will be active once you apply all of your settings or not. I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to enabled since I want to test the logging after I'm finished, and I can show you the results. So next, it's possible to specify a notification item for the purposes of notifying an HMI or SCADA that a database wedge action has just taken place. Here I would need to specify a Boolean item defined in the protocol of the topic I'm going to monitor. And then when this database wedge trigger fires a logging event to the database, that particular item would be set to true at that point. I would get that notification in my client application. Similarly, I can also specify a string item for the last error field, which if there were ever an error in the function of this database wedge, such as failure to log the value to the database for some reason, then the specific resulting error message would be populated in that specific last error item in the client application. It isn't required to select a notification or a last error item. You only really need to do that if you actually plan on monitoring the database wedge activity from a client application. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave these undefined. So now we come to the heart of the database wedge. I'm going to go to my triggers section. Here's where we define the conditions on which a logging event to the database will actually occur. So first we specify the trigger type. So I'll just expand this so you can see what our options are here. You see there are a number of options such as the default, which is any new value. You get an option for non-zero value or non-empty string. High limit, low limit, and many more, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and keep the default of any new value because I want the value of my tank to be logged every time it changes, whether that's increasing or decreasing. That's going to allow me to keep a historical trend of where the level has been, which will allow me to see any abnormal behavior over time, such as maybe I have a faulty pump or a leak or something somewhere, for instance. And working together with the type field, and now I need to specify the trigger item that I want the wedge to monitor here in the trigger. So I'm going to click the button here to select my tank level from my sensor 1 topic. Click OK. You'll see it populates. Format is topic name dot item name. And then last in the trigger section, we have a field for deadband. Now, deadband behaves differently depending on the trigger type that's specified. For our any new value trigger type, the value of my item is logged every time the value differs from the previous value. So after the initial trigger, the deadband here specifies a percentage that an incoming value of the trigger must drop below or rise above before the wedge is triggered again. So for example, if I were to set this to 5, for instance, meaning 5%, if I had a value of my tank level was 10,000, I have this deadband set to 5%, then for the wedge to be triggered again, the value of the tank item would need to increase or decrease by 500. So the wedge wouldn't log again until the value was either greater than or equal to 10,500 or less than or equal to 9,500. So you'll notice there's also an ABS flag here, stands for absolute. Now, if I were to enable that, this tells OmniServer that the number in the deadband text box is to be interpreted as an absolute value and not a percentage. So using our previous example, if the ABS flag is set, then the deadband value is treated as the number 5 and not 5%. That means the next value of the trigger must be less than or equal to 9,995 or greater than or equal to 10,005 to be logged to the database. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and leave the deadband undefined here, as I do want every value change logged regardless of magnitude. So moving on, then we have our reset section of the wedge configuration, where you can tell the wedge what item to reset and to what value it should be reset just before the action of the wedge is executed. Now, the most common use for the reset value is to reset the value of a trigger once the wedge has completed its action, thereby forcing the wedge to record all occurrences of the trigger, including recurrences of the same value. That use case is primarily if you set a trigger type of any new value, which we happen to be using here. Now, there shouldn't be any instances where the same value would be synced consecutively with my tank fill, since the level should always be either increasing or decreasing. However, to account for any instances where the fill has potentially stopped, which will be seen in the log file as the same value being logged consecutively, I am going to go ahead and specify my tank level item here that I've used previously. So I'm going to click, go to sensor 1 and select my tank level item. And I'm going to specify that with a reset value of 0. That way, after every trigger from a new value, OmniServer is going to write a 0 back to that tag. Now, then the next value change for my actual sensor will still register as a new value, even if the value hasn't actually changed. Now, it's important to make sure your protocol for the item being reset isn't configured to write back to your device. Otherwise, the value you specify here will actually be transmitted back to the device itself. Now, in my case, the item is only being used in my protocol to read data from the sensor. As such, any writes back to my tank level item are internal only and won't actually result in a write command being sent to the sensor. Now, another situation where being able to reset the value is useful for logging barcodes, since there's definitely a possibility of the same barcode being received consecutively. Resetting the value in this fashion allows OmniServer to treat the same consecutive value as a new value change. So moving on, next we have the database section. Now, the database section is where we define the parameters of the database we actually want the wedge to log to. Now, I already have a database pre-configured that I'll be logging to for this demo, and also have it set up in my ODBC data sources administration in Windows. For the database field that you see here, we need to know the name of the database as it is set up in that ODBC data source administration located here on my OmniServer machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring up my ODBC data sources administration. And this is my Windows ODBC data source administrator, 32-bit, because OmniServer is a 32-bit application. So you'll want your DSN to be either a user DSN or a system DSN, but if you plan to run OmniServer as a system service, you'll want to configure a system DSN. So it's located under the System DSN tab. Now, if you have any trouble configuring a system DSN or user DSN, you may need to confirm that you're actually logged in or running as an administrator to configure your DSN, because it is commonly necessary for you to have admin rights in order to be able to configure those DSNs. So you see under my DSN, my system DSN tab, I have here a data source called process.db. Now that's the database name that I need back in my Database Wedge configuration. So I'm going to go back over here to my OmniServer and I'm going to enter process.db. Next, I need the username and password of a user authorized to access that database that I want to log to. Now for my database, that's simply my Windows username and password, which I'll enter. Now for your own database, you'll want to consult your database administrator to gain access to the proper login credentials that you'll need to use to access the database you plan to log to. Now next, you'll see we have a table field here. Well, this is where I need to specify which table in my actual database I want my tank level information to be logged to. So to find that information out, I'm going to bring up my SQL Server management application. So I've got that launched. I'm just going to bring that up. And that'll allow me to find the proper table name to use. So I'm going to go ahead and expand my databases section. And here's my database, process.db, so I'm going to expand that. And then I'm going to find my tables folder and expand that. And this is the table I'm interested in, tank level. Now, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this open because I am going to need to access that later. But I'm going to go back to my OmniServer. And for the table, I'm going to enter tank level. And last but not least, in the database settings is the data mode. So you'll see we have an option for add data, which is the default, or replace data. Now, the default of add data tells the wedge to append any new data values to the end of the database it's logging to for those columns. So pretty straightforward. The other mode, replace data, you'll see I get a couple of other options that I'm going to explain once you select replace data. Now this specifies, instead of appending data to the end, this will force the wedge to override existing data in the table based on what you then specify for these other fields. So the other fields, you have a replace name field, and that specifies the actual column in that table, tank level, where the value will be replaced. Then you've got the replace value field, and that specifies the field value to search for in the specified column for replacement. If the specified value can't be found in the column in the database table, no replacement will be made. And then you've got the replace type, and that just sets the data type of that replace value. Now, since we want to log all values as they occur, we're going to main the default of add data. So I'm going to set that back to add data. Now, the last section of our configuration we're going to go to is the data section. This pertains to the actual logging of the process data to the proper columns in the proper format to the table we specified earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and click the new button here to add a new column. Now, I only want to keep track of my tank level and the corresponding timestamp for that tank level. So my field names here are column name, and that corresponds to a column in my table in my SQL database. Then you've got the column value, which is the actual values that we want to log, and which I'm going to come back to this one in just a moment. Then you've got the column type, which is the data type of that column in your SQL database. So, as I mentioned previously, I'm going to need to go back to my SQL Server Management Console to confirm the proper column names and data types in my table for the data in the database wedge. So I'm going to bring that back up. I'm going to open my table. So if I open that up, you'll see my column names. I have my timestamp column name, self-explanatory with the data type of date time. And then I have my column name of level tank 1, and it's a data type of real. So I need those values back over here. I'm going to go back to my OmniServer. And I'll define my first column by entering timestamp for the column name. And I'm going to set that column type. I'm going to set that to a timestamp as my corresponding, because I want that to be my timestamp. And now I'll get back to the column value field. Here's where we need to define what actual data is being retrieved from the tank and should be logged. Now, while I can define a number of different expressions, including string data, fixed numbers, or I can even define complex math expressions, such as calculations to convert my raw value to engineering units, for example. But for this example, I simply want to define columns to pass my timestamp and the value of my tank level item, which I used for the trigger and reset sections earlier. So I just need to enter the topic, which was sensor 1, then a dot, and my item name, which is tank level, and a dot, another dot, and I want to use the word timestamp to tell OmniServer to insert the timestamp for that. And then I'm going to click OK to complete my column for the timestamp. Now I'm going to go ahead and click New again to define my second column for the actual tank level value. We saw that my column name for the tank level was level tank 1. And that was a column type of real. But you'll see I don't have an actual corresponding option for real. The proper choice for real here is single, which corresponds to a 32-bit floating point. And you'll have seen that there was a double option in there. That corresponds to a 64-bit floating point for real. So then for my column value, we need to pass the value of our tank level item. So it'll be similar syntax. It's going to be my topic name, which is sensor 1, dot, item name, which is tank level, dot, and this time I'm going to use the special naming value to tell the wedge to pass the actual value for that item as my value to be logged to my database. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now that I've defined all of the columns, we're finished with this database wedge. So I just need to click OK to apply. And for the purposes of this video, I've ensured that my tank level value will be changing so I can show you the resulting entries in SQL. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK there. And if I go back over to my SQL Server Management Studio, close out of that, I'm going to right-click on my table, tank level. I'm going to select the option, select top 1,000 rows to perform a query. And you'll see here at the bottom, I've got timestamps and values for my tank levels. See my timestamp here is my first column, and my level tank 1 has the values for my actual tank level here in the second column. So, that being said, as you can see, the database wedge in OmniServer is very straightforward to configure, and it gives you the ability to log your non-standard device data to any ODBC-compliant database for easy analysis, reporting, and troubleshooting of your process.